Salik, Associate Research Fellow at SDPI. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of SDPI on this hybrid seminar on climate change impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. IPCC Working 2 report on 2022. Lessons and way forward for South Asia. I'd like to briefly describe for the wider audience that this IPCC means the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a United Nations body for assessing the scientific science related to climate change, created in 1988 by World Meteorological Organization and United Nations Environmental Program. The objective of this reports actually is of IPCC is to provide government the science about climate change and to develop the national policies and also the key input for the international climate negotiations, the conference of parties. So IPCC has regularly produces this comprehensive scientific assessment reports, which are published after 6 to 7 years. The previous assessment, the fifth assessment report was completed in 2014, and now it is in this sixth assessment report is in 2022. So these are in IPCC. There are 3 working groups. The working group 1 is mostly linked with the physical sciences, and that report launched in August 2021, and at SDPI we have the seminar to discuss the outcome of that working paper, that report. Now this is in February 2022. The working group 2 report, which is on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability, is launched. So which assesses mainly the vulnerability of socioeconomic and natural systems to climate change, negative and positive consequences of climate change, and options for adapting to it. So this seminar is basically for this report. There is another report which is coming in April this month. This is called Working Group 3 report, which is on mitigation to climate change, that focuses on the climate change mitigation efforts and assessing the methods for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So as I mentioned earlier, that this seminar is mainly discuss the regional aspects of climate change that is emerging out from this Working Group 2 report, impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. So this seminar actually conducted, we conducted 2 quick rounds. The first round actually allows speakers to speak about 5 to 6 minutes regarding some questions, and of course their own insights from the report or their learning. And then in the second round, we talk about the regional aspect, that how we can work together and what are the ways for different stakeholders in South Asia that may work together to counter these challenges. So I will introduce the speakers. We have 7 speakers, and I will introduce the speakers as they speak. So first of all, I just want to invite Dr. Abid Suleri, Executive Director SDPI, for their welcome remarks. Dr. Saab.
Thank you, Kashif. Good afternoon, Sanjay, Imran, Ma'am Aisha Khan, Dr. Abid Hussain, who is also one of the co-authors for this report, Dr. Hina, and Dr. Kashif Fahad. While we are discussing the second volume of this report, the political wrangling over the third volume is also concluded last night, although 2 days delay. But now governments and scientists, their battle over how to present the state of climate science, that finally got concluded. Before we will get to read this third report, which is called Solutions, I think it's important to understand the magnitude of problems. And in order to understand the magnitude of problems, with us who are not only contributing towards the theory of this report, but also on practical side, trying to see that what are the plausible and pragmatic solutions and way forward. And also, they would be highlighting that what may happen if we don't adopt to those solutions. So if we don't mend our house, if we don't have things in order, the consequences which are one is already observing, those would be even drastic. So without ado, I'll welcome all the panelists. I'm looking forward to get educated on the summary finding of the second report, in which South Asia for the first time was declared as one of the hotspots for climate vulnerabilities, along with sub-Saharan Africa and other vulnerable regions of the world. So Kashif, I hope that we will be able to prepare the policy recommendations coming from this hybrid seminar, not only for our international stakeholders, but also for the government of Pakistan, so that they can take up some of these recommendations in order to improve not only the implementation of NDCs, but also to improve the preparation for COP27. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. And of course, when we have completed our discussion in the seminar, hopefully the recommendations coming out from the seminar will be collated and then published as a policy brief. So let me start about the first speaker. I just want to invite Dr. Fahad Saeed, who is a climate scientist and has been involved in international climate negotiations of UNFCCC and IPCC, while providing the policy and real-time support to the various least developing countries, focal points, and representatives, both before and during the process. His support is based on the robust scientific evidences and assessment of climate science, impact, vulnerability, adaptation, and mitigation. Dr. Fahad will speak about the key insights of the report, and later we will ask him some questions. Dr. Fahad, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kashif, and thank you very much, SDPI. It's always been a pleasure to come back to SDPI. My previous home, and still is, and it's also, I'm very glad to speak on the finding of this report. So just a warning that it'll be a bit flat what I'm going to say in the next 5 to 6 minutes, because these are the messages which I took from the underlying chapters of the report. But I'll be glad to have discussion on those in case you have questions. But what I'll try to do is to briefly give you a taste of all the main sectors which are covered in this report. So that report, this IPCC Working Group 2 report reinforces the risks associated with global warming for South Asian countries as found in earlier assessment, and labeled South Asia, as Dr. Abid has said, as one of the global hotspots of high human vulnerability, which is heightened in location with poverty, governance challenge, conflicts, and high level of climate-sensitive livelihoods. In countries like South Asian region, the mortality from extremes such as floods, droughts, and storms was reported to be 15 times higher than countries with low vulnerability in the last decade. Moreover, extreme events, weather events are also likely to increase risks of food insecurity by 2030 in South Asia because of its limited adaptive capacity. An increase in the likelihood of the threat of heat waves, storms, delays, and weakening of monsoon circulations, floods, glacier melting, and droughts in arid and semi-arid areas of South Asia is reported at the current level of warming. And just to let you know that currently we are 1.1 degrees centigrade warmer than pre-industrial world. And the ambitious target of Paris Agreement is 1.5 degrees centigrade. So all this vulnerability we are facing is at present level of warming. So you can assume that even by putting ourselves in line with the ambitious goal or the lower limit, sometimes it is called, although we believe that it is the limit of 1.5 degrees centigrade, all these extremes which I've talked about are going to increase. Now I'll come to water. Water is an important sector for South Asia, as agriculture is the mainstay of many countries in the region, besides providing livelihood to a large number of people, both directly and indirectly. Both climatic and non-climatic drivers, such as socioeconomic changes, have created water stress condition in both water supply and demand in South Asia. These changes in space and time directly or indirectly affected water use sectors and services by mid-21st century. The international transporting boundary river basins of Indus and Ganges could face severe water scarcity challenges, with climate change acting as a stress multiplier. Due to global warming, Asian countries could experience increase of drought condition by the end of this century. Many glaciers in the HKH region have witnessed shrinkage as well as mass loss during 2006 to 2016, resulting in instability of water resource supply. The 8K region is a source of major river system originating in Asia, support livelihoods, energy, agriculture, and ecosystem for 240 million in the mountains and hills, and 1.65 billion in the plains. While the warming climate increases the meltwater runoff and enhancing water supply, it is indeed at the cost of glacier mass reduction that would eventually reduce meltwater and impact on the people's livelihood downstream in future. Changes in cryosphere and other environmental changes have already impacted people living in high mountain areas and are likely to introduce new challenges for water, energy, and food security in the future. South Asia has a long coastline of more than 9,000 kilometers comprising of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. The risk of irreversible loss of coral reefs, tidal marshes, seagrass meadows, and other marine and coastal ecosystem increases with global warming, especially at 2 degrees centigrade temperature rise or more. Mangroves in the region continue to face threat due to pollution, conversion of aquaculture, agriculture, and in addition to climate-based threats like sea level rise and coastal erosion. South Asian urban areas are considered high-risk locations from projected climate extreme events, unplanned urbanization, and rapid land use change. Coastal cities in South Asia are expected to see significant increase in average annual economic losses between 2005 and 2050 due to flooding. Climate change will amplify the urban heat island effect across Asian cities at 1.5 and 2 degrees centigrade temperature rise, both substantially larger than under the present climate. Climate change also has health implications, and it is increasing vector-borne and waterborne diseases, undernutrition, mental disorders, and allergic disease in South Asia by increasing the hazards such as heat waves, flooding and drought, air pollutants in combination with more exposure and vulnerability. Increased floods and droughts will have adverse impact on food availability and prices of food, resulting in increased undernourishment in South Asia. Increases in heavy rain and temperature will increase the risk of diarrheal diseases, dengue fever, and malaria in the part of the region. Increased climate variability and extreme events are already driving migration. In projecting long-term climate change will increase migration flows across South Asia. In 2019, Bangladesh and India recorded more than 4 million disaster displacement each. Moreover, South Asia is also identified as a region in which climate change has exacerbated temporary, seasonal, or permanent migration in the recent past. Now, I'll quickly come to the options. Won't take a lot of time, perhaps 1 more minute. So options such as climate smart agriculture, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, investing in urban blue-green infrastructure, meet adaptation, mitigation and sustainable development goals, simultaneously presenting opportunities for climate resilient development pathways in South Asia. Climate risks, vulnerability, and adaptation measures need to be factored into decision-making across all levels of governance. To help achieve this, there is a need to advance the current understanding of climate impacts across sectors and spatio-temporal scales and improve on the current strategies in planning and budget allocation. More accurate forecasting of extreme events, risk awareness, and prioritizing individual and collective decision choices are also need to be enhanced. Options for South Asian countries in transforming risk of climate change into opportunities for the advancement of projects in energy sector, including promoting investment in non-fossil energies, securing local natural gas resources, enhancing water harvesting, adopting green building technologies, and encouraging multi-stakeholder partnerships. However, there are significant barriers to climate resilient development, such as fragmented, reactive governance, and inadequate evidence on which action to prioritize and how to sequence them, and finance deficits. Some enablers to overcome these barriers identified in the report include advanced technologies, regional partnership and learning, improved forecasting capabilities, and better risk awareness. So I'll stop here and give it back to Kashif.
Thank you, Fahad, for providing the brief insights from the IPCC report, working group 2 report. Before I go to the next speaker, I just like to ask you one quick question, which came into mind when you are discussing about the current strategies and planning. So it's we heard that IPCC it is called the Bible of climate change science. So if you elaborate more a bit about how it is important for policy making, particularly to the South Asia and perspective. So it's we then move to the next speaker.
Yes, Kashif, thank you very much for this question. It's a very pertinent one. First of all, let me tell you that how it is important for the discussion in UNFCCC. So in UNFCCC, we discuss deals. We do, I mean, it's more of like political negotiation. But IPCC is truly a scientific body. It doesn't do its own research. That's very important to know it. What it does, that it goes into the literature, picks out the point, synthesize those messages and present it before the policymakers. So just to give you an idea that, as you said, that IPCC was created in 1988. The first IPCC report came out in 1990. It resulted in the creation of UNFCCC in 1992. So the very creation of UNFCCC can be attributed to IPCC. And then the second assessment report of IPCC came in 1995, which resulted in the messages coming from that report resulted into Kyoto Protocol, which was a very important global agreement at that time. And the fifth assessment report, as you again mentioned, that came out in 2013 and 14. So after the fifth assessment report, there was a process at the UNFCCC which established called periodic review, in which the messages from IPCC were, were presented in different phases before the negotiators. And that resulted in the 1.5 degrees centigrade target in Paris Agreement. If you look at the history, 1.5 was not on the card. It was because of that periodic review where the world realized that 1.5 degrees centigrade is a red line for many of the countries. So that's where you can see that how important it is for the global negotiation.
Thank you. We have some more questions, but we come later to you. Now I invite our next speaker, Dr. Abid Hussain, who is a development economist, currently working as a senior economist as food system specialist at International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD, Nepal. He's also leading a group on socioeconomics at ICIMOD. He's among the authors of cross-chapter paper on mountains in this working group 2 report, contribution to IPCC 6 assessment report. He's also a lead author for Biodiversity, Water, Food, Health Nexus of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform. Dr. Abid, I just like to share your views regarding to the question that how relevant the assessment report 6 assessment report regarding the sectoral planning, such as the agriculture and forestry, and how sustainable development for South Asia can be achieved, and also how strongly these impacts influence the future development of human society at national or regions level. Over to you, Dr. Hussain.
Thank you very much, Kashif sir. This is very important question. When I go through the findings, key findings of this report, it's very difficult to find any finding which is not relevant for our region, South Asia. So I will not repeat the key findings of this report because Dr. Fahad has already described almost all key findings. So to understand the role of this report or findings of this report for sectoral planning, I would like to give example of food security. As we know, for any sustainable development planning, we have dimensions. Among those dimensions, the main dimension is environmental sustainability. So climate change lies in that environmental sustainability dimension. Within that dimension, two major changes which are happening in South Asia, particularly in the mountainous regions of South Asia, are biodiversity loss and climate change. Both are in that dimensions. And this dimension, sustainability, environmental sustainability, is cross-cutting for economic sustainability, social sustainability, and technical sustainability, and all that. We can imagine anything happens in this dimension, environmental sustainability, will have significant impact on all other dimensions of sustainability and overall sustainable development planning. For example, as Dr. Fahad mentioned, climate change report clearly mentions that will have impact on food availability, of course, through production, disturbances, food accessibility, food diversity, even through agrobiodiversity loss and disturbances in ecosystem. So if I put these findings of this report in an overall framework, a multidimensional framework of food security, we have currently 6 dimensions of food security. Previously, these were 4: availability, accessibility, utilization, stability, agency, and sustainability. So climate change is lying in stability dimension and sustainability dimension. These 2 dimensions are cross-cutting, are impacting all other 4 dimensions of food security. If we do not address, of course, climate change impacts timely, adequately, it will disturb the food security, not only in current scenarios, but also in adverse scenarios. For example, 2-degree or 3-degree temperature rise. So even in this current ongoing century, climate risks are likely to rise. Of course, more chances of gloves events, floods, droughts. These hazards are cascading and compounding, and some are reversible impacts, some are irreversible impacts of these cascading compounding hazards. I would like to give example of Gulf again, glacial lake outburst floods. It also triggers landslides. It also induces damages and losses to infrastructure and economy and ecologies as well. Of course, it also triggers the probability of, or increases the chances of probability of debris flow and damages in low-lying areas, and silting of dams, hydropower projects, and all that. All these things have implications on food security. For example, another thing, climate out-migration was mainly treated in scientific literature as an independent socioeconomic change. Very less evidence was available to attribute this out-migration with climate change. Now in this IPCC report, there is clear evidence out-migration is also triggered by environmental changes, particularly climate change. So climate change, if we see the bright side of out-migration, then of course we have remittances in the form of money and skills, what out-migrants bring in. Of course, they also bring in the skills to establish enterprises and all that. Sometimes some studies, they also refer out migration and remittances as an adaptation strategy. But there is dark side also of out migration. Remember, out migration triggered by climate change. For example, particularly from desert area and mountain areas of Pakistan, because of out migration, there are labor shortages in agriculture. These labor shortages are putting more pressure on women, more burden, particularly on elderly women. They have to take care of agriculture activities. And there are high incidence of land abandonment in our mountain areas. Because of this, there is clear impact on agriculture productivity and diversity of agriculture. These things are implicit still in IPCC report, but evidences are available, and in upcoming IPCC assessments, of course, there will be the assessment or trade-off between out migration or remittances as an adaptation strategy and its severe impacts on food and agriculture. And another thing, whatever happens in the agriculture systems or food systems cannot be attributed to climate change, of course. But there is enough evidence is available that climate change is also inducing the biodiversity, agro-biodiversity loss. All crops which were part of our agriculture systems for decades, for centuries, for example, millet, buckwheat, barley, and a lot of local species of maize, rice, now they are disappearing. Not only because of direct impacts of climate change, but also because of indirect. Because of climate change, productivity is going down, and farmers and local communities, they try to compensate this economic loss through the indulgence of hybrid varieties, to indulge the high yielding varieties. So this gradual shift is actually resulting in agro-biodiversity loss in agriculture. Current UN Food System Summit and recent global debate has shifted from food security to nutrition security. Now more focus is on nature-based solutions and nutrition aspects. So with the erosion of these traditional food varieties, species, it's a big challenge to revert it, to regain or revive these diversity in the agriculture system. So this is also a long-term thing to be handled, and it's very important for future agriculture and social development planning. Another thing very important, it's very clear from IPCC assessments, no policies are now static. All policies are dynamic. This is my personal opinion. All policies need to be revisited, redirect, repurpose after every 4 or 5 years. Situations are changing very dynamically now. If we see even the example of climate change. So a review doesn't mean all policies, instruments, and everything need to be changed. Some instruments have to be flexible and need periodic revisions and redirecting, refinancing, and reprioritization. So overall, climate change, in a nutshell, falls under the environmental sustainability of sustainable development planning. So anything happens in environmental sustainability, of course, because of climate change or biodiversity and some other changes, it will impact the overall sustainability and sustainable development planning in South Asia beyond Pakistan. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Hussain, for providing such detailed information about the mountain ecosystems and the glaciers and the food system aspect. So the question which I came into my mind, that how this new report is actually different from the previous one. What the key 1-2 ideas that are actually you'd consider that regarding the mountains and the food security you has mentioned, that this is the new thing which actually emerged, and this is the most important thing actually that need to be worked for the South Asia. So what are those things, 1 or 2? Thank you.
Yeah, number 1. So in the thematic assessments, so high altitude mountain areas were there was one chapter on high altitude mountain areas, but in regular assessment, there was no chapter on vulnerable areas, particularly on mountains. This is one thing new. So mountain ecosystems are recognized and acknowledged at global level and in the science arena. One thing. Another thing, loss and damage is coming very clearly this time. So another thing, the pure socioeconomic and cultural aspects are also coming very clearly in this IPCC assessment report. So and another thing, if I can add, now scientific evidence level or base has also improved. So a lot of things on which we had not that much strong scientific evidence, now we have high confidence. It means scientific bodies improving, of course. Another thing, as I mentioned, vulnerable areas are now being considered as one of the key things in the development planning in the face of changing climate. Can you imagine 54% of Pakistan is mountain? If I see agriculture statistics of Pakistan, around 61% of Pakistan is mountain. Of course, there are some plain mountainous valleys in KPK or in the Potha region of Pakistan. If we exclude those valleys also, even Even then, we will have around 50% of Pakistan mountainous. If we exclude mountainous Pakistan from overall planning, I think it's cutting one hand of the country. Very rich agro biodiversity base is very strong, and we have high potential on these crops, which I mentioned, traditional food crops. Now these crops are being relabeled as future smart crops because of their high nutrition value, more importance in terms of climate resilience, and another thing, their adaptability to changing climate. So that's why these crops are important. So mountain ecosystems are important. Another point, so if we see the findings together, the working group 1 report and working group 2 report, there is high likelihood of flood events, particularly in Pakistan, because of floods. So if I see the data, I have data. So in the Indus River Basin, if I give example of, we have around 5,700 glacial lakes. So because of rise in temperature and heavy precipitation in high altitude mountain areas are also predicted by IPCC report, biophysical sciences report by group 1. So with rise in temperature in high altitudes and more predicted heavy rainfall in those areas, and with this number of glacial lakes, we can imagine how many of these lakes can turn into potentially dangerous glacial lakes, which can trigger high incidence of floods in future in Pakistan. If I see other river basin, for example, Ganges, 4,000 glacial lakes. If I see Brahmaputra, 13,000 glacial lakes, we can see the severity of danger which climate change is posing in coming decades to our region. Over.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Dr. Sen, I will come later with you about the research agenda you proposed for the South Asian level for this regarding to the adaptation or mitigations. Our next speaker is Dr. Aisha, Miss Aisha Khan, who is an Executive Director of Civil Society Coalition for Climate Change and Chief Executive Officer of Mountain and Glacier Organization. She is a founding member of both the organizations and regularly contributes articles to newspapers and magazines on issues related to environment and climate change. She has over 18 years of experience in development sector, having worked in collaboration with multiple donors, national and subnational authorities and communities. So I just like to invite Dr. Saiba to discuss that what new insights regarding impact, vulnerability, and risks you think that is very important and are more clear and now more available in this report, which is actually critical for immediate actions, particularly for the regional collaborations, regional policymaker or management of climate change and environment. So over to you, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Kashif. First of all, I want to thank SDPI for organizing this conversation because it forced me to read this voluminous document, which otherwise I may have postponed for later. It is fairly exhaustive, the report, but it comprehensively covers all the anticipated impacts of climate change with high, low, medium confidence. So that gives us a very good idea of the direction in which we are headed. There are also, things which are still unforeseen, which is alarming because they create the uncertainties. We don't know what are the forces that will come into play and add to the needs for adaptation and accelerated mitigation in the future. But, my previous speakers have already highlighted the vulnerabilities and some of the highlights of the report that has brought focus on certain regions which were not mentioned or articulated upon that clearly in earlier reports. And in the context of South Asia, they have also highlighted the areas that are of concern. So I will just go and add on to that if we have to prioritize, looking at it from the South Asian lens, there are three areas that come to my mind, three sectors, in fact, that come to my mind on which, as a first priority, we need to pay attention. The first, of course, is water, because the hydrological imbalances in this region are going to create catastrophic results if we don't manage them well. At the present, we really don't have any exact idea of that rate of melting, but we know that it can be anything between 30% reduction in snow volume and 30 to 70%, depending on the rate of the warming that will take place. So that is very critical, because for us in Pakistan, it means too much water or too little water after a certain time. And both scenarios can be very, very difficult, because too much will mean floods and too little will mean scarcities. I think an earlier speaker already identified that we derive, our water, all the countries, 8 countries in South Asia, we derive our water from the same sources. So there's a direct dependency of about 240 million and about 1.65, as I think Fahad had said, indirectly. So that's a large number of people who rely on the ecological goods and services that flow from this area. So any disruption here will mean disruption in society at multiple levels. Then we also occupy a very vast cryospheric space. Changes here in permafrost, in cryosphere, in melting, in upper ablation, lower ablation glaciers, it's not fully understood because we do not engage in collaborated or coordinated research. So there has been, as you know, questions about the Karakoram anomaly for a very long time, but since the scale is very limited of the number of glaciers that we have actually gone and done field work in research, we don't have a very good idea. Mostly we rely on works that come out of ICIMOD telling us about what is happening in the HKH region. And I personally also revert mostly to ICIMOD reports about the behavior of the cryosphere. Then the third thing related with water is the groundwater, because we have to remember, that there is an inherent interconnectedness in the interaction between ground and surface water in the hydrologic continuum. So we have to take that into account to see how that is going to affect, and working towards hydrosolidarity, working towards a shared basin management approach is going to be extremely important for everyone in the region if we want to strengthen regional resilience. The second area that I think is very important is climate hotspots. Climate hotspots have already been identified, and this report reinforces that South Asia is warming up more rapidly than the rest of the world, which means that if earlier it was projected there'll be nearly 800 million people that will be affected as a result of these heat islands that will be created, perhaps there will now be a larger number. So we have to see whether, how we will manage this mass movement and displacement of people. Urban resilient infrastructures are not adequate, and at the same time, within the region, if it has a transboundary and a spillover factor, we don't have any framework to address this humanitarian crisis. So I think as a priority at the regional level, we have to try and develop a framework on how we are going to manage this crisis that's going to unfold sooner or later. The third area on which I think that we need to pay attention is disaster risk reduction, because most of these disasters that were referred to by Dr. Abid and the earlier speakers are going to be hydrometeorological in their nature. So we have to take the accelerated melting into account and see where are the areas in which collaboration can reduce the risk. So early warning, information sharing, telemetric information sharing, more collaboration and information sharing between the Met departments in the region. These are things that we can talk about. I think the last thing that I want to mention is the nexus between science, society, and policy. I always, reinforce that because I believe that each one requires a buy-in from the other to move forward. So all get informed by science. So I put that as number one, because all of us need to base what we are saying on scientific evidence. And then if society gets to understand its vulnerabilities and its responsibilities, it can put pressure on policy to move in the right direction. But we need to do this at the regional level. We don't even do it at the country level often enough. So we need to start doing it at the country level so that there is a larger awareness amongst the people and a sense of urgency that we need to address this issue. It is looking down upon us now as an imminent threat, because, you know, this also establishes the 2030, year 2030 as the critical milestone by when we need to put our house in order. The planet's future is at stake. So for the next conference of parties that is coming up, we need to have a more ambitious agenda. And, you know, unfortunately, as a region, we have still not come together to represent ourselves as one region to say we can take a regional approach towards certain actions. So we must show more solidarity, more collaboration, more, you know, leading up to it, we should be doing things together in the region that bring this solidarity in our approach towards our region, looking upon it as one humanity within the region. So I think these are some of, you know, the areas. Of course, I work in mountain regions, so mountain regions are very close to me, and I'm familiar with them with my 20-year, you know, history of being a practitioner. So I was very happy to see the emphasis on mountain regions, but within the region, you know, I mean, there's so much in terms of the geography that we share that we can learn from each other's best practices. We all have mountain regions, coastal regions, plains, deserts, you know, so there's plenty of scope for collaboration. And I'm happy to say that in the second Islamabad security dialogue that we had, there was a recognition of the need to collaborate in climate change, and even willingness to decouple politics from those subjects which would have a positive impact on social well-being and contribute to economic prosperity. So I think from our side, the momentum can be built. And we should try and take this forward. And I look forward to SDPI playing a lead role in this, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, you elaborated the areas regarding mountains and glaciers and water sources, and particularly the hotspots, climate hotspots, and the resultant humanitarian crisis that need some framework. Actually, that's really a good suggestion, I think so. So a very quick question is regarding, because you have a vast experience at regional level, what gaps actually currently you are thinking that these are the gaps or the hurdles that creating issues to collaborate or integrate some collective efforts at regional scale, at social scales. So what are the solutions for that? So you talk about some forums or what science talks or scientist talks, or what areas the policymakers can integrate each other. So what could stake on that?
Yeah, I think, you know, if regionally we try to cooperate, and, you know, we do it along the lines of the conference of parties, but at the regional level. So countries come together and they share, you know, their mitigation and adaptation plans, and they look for synergies with each other where each can provide support to the other. At least we will develop a better understanding that you know, instead of looking at each other as adversaries, we will start looking at each other as partners in trying to do something that is for the common good of everyone who lives in this region, rather than talk in narrow terms about our own country. So I think just organizing any kind of a dialogue, it can be only about food security, it can be about water management, it can be about, DRR and loss and damage, but whichever subject sector one chooses, the idea is to bring the region together. And I think that, a dialogue on water would be of interest to everybody, because, hydro solidarity is the most critical issue that we need to address. Shared basin management approach is something that we have been talking about, and there's already been a lot of work that's been done. Several round table conversations have taken place. World Bank has supported different kinds of dialogues. Even now there is one going on called the Champions Dialogue for the last 7 or 8 years, but it hasn't been able to bring together any result to take it to the next level. So I think the effort should be now to create that sense of urgency. And at the next COP, hopefully to have a platform where the regional countries come and speak together. So at least we make a beginning somewhere to say we own this region. Everyone who lives in it is part of the same humanity. Anything happening in one part of the region is going to have an effect on the other part of the region. So we can't look at it in isolation anymore. It's too near home now to let other issues come in between. So we must make this our number one agenda and look at our collective survival.
Thank you, Ms. Aisha Khan. It's very excellent presentation of the ideas of integration and collaboration. So now I just want to extend this discussion with Sanjay wishes. Sanjay has a 24-year of working experience as a regional director of Climate Action Network for South Asia, and has been actively working toward mobilize civil society actions on climate policies in South Asia countries and regions. Under his leadership, can South Asia have increased its membership base from 20 to above 300 NGOs spread in South Asian countries. So with this brief background, I just ask Sanjay, because I'm inspired from his personality from many years. Actually, I saw him working on so enthusiastically on climate loss and damages, migration, climate risk migration. So I'm really impressed from his efforts. So just one quick question is that how can we work together, as Aisha mentioned about the regional integration for the collaborative work. So I just want your ideas that how we can work together for better regional level to address the issues of climate change and to improve the resilience and economic development for future climate impacts in South Asia. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Kashif. The beauty of such event is that people share, how does they feel about each other, and that's really encouraging show of sentiments. If I can, I have few slides to share. Basically, what does IPCC Working Group 2 report says about South Asia? And then I'll also conclude it on impact of climate change on SDGs, and then what we can do on South Asia level. Is that okay? Can I share some slides?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, it's fine. You can.
Thank you. Thank you, Kashif. Thank you, Bhai and Aisha and all for having me in panel. Basically, I have all the slides about chapters. That thematic chapters and all that, but great, the panelist has already covered sectoral findings of IPCC, so I'll just focus on South Asia. But before that, generic key vulnerabilities that IPCC Working Group 2 has identified, and what does IPCC Working Group 2 report says on adaptation vulnerability. One, climate change has already caused substantial damages and increasingly irreversible losses. I mean, as we have started saying, and outside also, we have entered into a loss and damage era. It's no more adaptation. It's no more need for mitigation and everything will be fine. Or okay, fine, we need adaptation also along with the mitigation. Now we are into loss and damage era. Losses, permanent losses and irreversible losses have happened. and in terrestrial, freshwater, and coastal and open ocean marine ecosystems. And now the problem is much bigger. It is also the extinction will reach 9% at 1.5 degree. Remember, we are already at 1 degree. So the proportion of all terrestrial and freshwater species are at very high risk. So if we touch at 1.5 degree, then also the losses will be, the extinction will be around 9%. It can go till 14%. And this rises to 10% at 2 degree and 12% to 3 degrees. So as the temperature goes up, the extinction of species will be there. IPCC working group has already identified that 3 species have already been extinct in last 2 decades. So there are, that phenomenon is happening, and which is irreversible and permanent losses. Approximately 3.3 to 3.6 billion people live in contexts and high vulnerable to climate change. It's almost half, little bit above half of the population, which is affected and highly vulnerable to climate change. And the major hotspots, when I say hotspots, that means most vulnerable areas are those where climate change interacts with already vulnerable areas. I mean, and that means non-climate drivers, like an area which is affected with pollution. I mean, I know Lahore, all northern India and Pakistan are affected from October till March because of air pollution. And here the impact or losses of climate change will be much higher, and this could lead to humanitarian crisis and then also driving displacement. Of course, we are working on climate-induced migration as one of the program and building some policy response from them. Increasing weather and climate extreme events have exposed millions of people to acute food insecurity and reduced water security. And South Asia is one among them, and which is basically the means of life on Earth. Approximately 50 to 75% of global population could be exposed to periods of life-threatening climatic conditions, and due to extreme heat and humidity by 2100. Now, mixing of heat and humidity, there is a new term that IPCC has given in its working group too, is a wet bulb. They call it wet bulb, where you have high heat and high humidity, and it's very difficult to breathe because moisture content is higher. Climate change will increasingly put pressure on food production and access, especially in vulnerable areas. And we are already in areas where food security is an issue, especially in developing countries. South Asia is one among them, and it is already putting a lot of food pressure, a lot of pressure on the food production. In addition to that, many of our governments are talking about biofuels as a way of, basically to energize transport sector or energy in future. And that could be a disaster. So a wrong policy decision on promoting biofuels could mean that poor people will be growing fuel for rich, and they will be starving by themselves. And the climate change will certainly increase ill health and premature deaths from near to long-term. So this is an overall impact: food security, water security, health impact, cities, how they're impacted, migration, impact on livelihoods. All these has been covered in the IPCC Working Group 2 report. What IPCC has said is this situation today in Delhi, in India now. I mean, this is the map I just received when this panel discussion started, so I thought I'll just share with you. We are going through a heat wave already today. So what has been forecasted for future, those signs are already visible, and it's very hot outside. Impact on South Asia. Economic damages will be steep without aggressive global mitigation. And none of the developed countries are going for a global mitigation or ambitious mitigation targets, unfortunately. Yes, they're going for energy transition, but then they want, they want to hold on both. They want to hold on to the fossil fuel. They want to expand on the renewable energy. And when renewable energy system becomes stronger, then they will be shifting. So by then it will be too late for us. Without adaptation measures, India's GDP loss from sea level rise alone will be by second only to China by 2020. This is a reference from IPCC. And sea level, with 7,600 kilometers of coastal line in India, the losses will be very high. High level of heat exposure, risk of concurrent flood, drought incidents places India among the countries most vulnerable to climate change. One of the things I just wanted to say here before I go ahead to the next slides, There's a lot more references in the report on India and not other South Asian countries, primarily because, as you know, at the start it was mentioned that it is all compilations, the research, and then IPCC report, assessment report is prepared. So a lot more research was available from India, so that's why they could use it. But I see that this applicable to whole South Asia. We are no different with each other. So certainly, so with this underlying, there is going to be a high level of heat exposure and risk of concurrent flood and drought incidents among countries most vulnerable to climate change. Loss of 2% of GDP in South Asian countries by 2050. We cannot afford. In fact, as the population grows up, as our needs grows up, and as we have to catch up with the development trajectory or sustainable development goals, accomplishing sustainable development goals, the loss will be availability of less resources for increasing agenda. Exposure to heat, extreme heat is expected to become more frequent, intense, and long-lasting in South Asia. In Indus, we heard about water. In Indus and Ganga river basin, deadly heat waves could cross the limits of human survivability. South Asia will be one of the regions hardest hit by heat stress with outdoor workers. In fact, it is to an extent that the climatically stressful days in a year for a worker, outdoor worker, would be 250 out of 365 days. So it will be very less of high efficiency working days. There will be less. There will be more climatically stressful days in which they have to work. We heard from Dr. Abid Hussain about glacial lake. Nepal has already lost almost 24% of glacial area in 1980-2010. That's the finding. Cities are projected to grow by 90% across the world. And we know when cities grow, the concentration of population and then disaster hitting it could lead to higher mortality rate. So that's one. Ample evidence that women in South Asia will be disproportionately bear the impact of climate change. And there will be increased workload, stress for women, and climate-induced food security in South Asia will be a result of negative birth outcomes. So certainly women and children will be at the forefront, bearing the impact, and changes to water availability will make India's energy system. And now this is where the source is impacted. The coal power plant in India will run dry of water because of high vulnerability and heat stress conditions. So any country which is planning to invest into coal in future, please learn this lesson from India, that the coal power plant will not be sustainable in future because of the less water availability. In 2015, 14 or 15, India had to shut down many of its coal power plants because we were left with only 35% of the water, and the summer was still going on. So now this is going to be a novel phenomena. So it is very essential to go for energy transition and shift towards renewable energy, which is dependent on more heat rather than water availability. 4 million people were displaced in disaster-induced events in Bangladesh and India, each in 2019. And these 4 million people are all disaster impacted people. Remember, displacement also happened in 2020, but that was because of COVID lockdown. This is before that. Report, however, underscores the migration is not a feasible strategy. So those who think, oh, you migrate, you're fine. No, migration is not a feasible adaptation strategy in India as it deepens climate change justice. And what is the impact on sustainable development? Very high. I'll not go through all slides. I know time is limited, but third of all the evidence, the IPCC assesses livelihood impacts come from just 3 countries, Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. 3 countries has the highest livelihood impact, indicating accumulating experience with livelihood impact in South Asia. Most vulnerable regions in the world include South Asia also. It estimates 1.6 to 3.3 billion people are living in countries classified as very highly vulnerable. So there are more people living in high or highly vulnerable countries compared to only 0.8 to 2 billion living in regions classified as least vulnerable. So less people are safe, more people are vulnerable, and that could mean more people facing the risk. By 2030, it is expected that people living in extreme poverty is set to increase by 122 million. That's the numbers we are looking at. And it threatens, with this kind of impact, forget about achieving no poverty, forget about achieving zero hunger, forget about gender equality and reducing inequality. All these SDGs are at risk, and we have to achieve it in the next 2 years. So I'll stop here. And what we need to do as South Asia, one, we have to make available the resources, funds, so that we can practice and implement adaptation at a larger scale. Second, our planning should not be inward looking. They need to be regional in nature. Every national adaptation plan or nationally determined contribution in South Asia, they should have a chapter on how, for example, how Pakistan NDC will interact with India's NDC. And that could lead to solar trade, solar energy trade. That could lead to exchange of adaptation practices. That could lead to effective coordination on sharing the water. A lot more can be done. Similarly for Bangladesh. So planning need to be regional in nature. There should be finances that we have to we stop waiting for developed countries to give you trillions. No, it has to be mobilized by us, and we can do that. Our private sector need to find ways to contribute into adaptation. For example, as of now, private sector talks about corporate social responsibility. Why can't private sector be encouraged to talk about business social responsibility? And that means they work towards their own resilience, and their resilience is linked with their supply chains and their selling of the goods to the consumer. So it needs to be both ways, and private sector can mobilize a lot more money. And then very immediate energy transition, and we should not leave anyone behind in energy transition. Communities who are dependent on fossil fuel economy as of now, they should be able to, they also need to be engaged in a livelihood framework that ensures that they're not left behind, and they can work towards their decent life as well as higher resilience. So I'll stop here, Kashif.
Thank you, Sanjay, for a very elaborative presentation and very useful suggestions. I like the idea that you have mentioned about the NDCs should have, national NDCs should have a chapter that linked to the neighboring countries' NDCs and their issues. So it's a good idea that need to be highlighted with the policy makers and within the scientific community. One quick question with you is that my observation is that because my interest is in migration, climate-induced migration, I was looking into the report, and there is a high confidence in the report that there is a climate-induced or climate hazards actually trigger migrations globally. But when the report mentioned the South Asia, their confidence level become low. There is a low confidence. So do you think why this is so? Because we think our research show that there's a large number of climate migrants is in South Asia. So is it because of this? You have already mentioned that because there's lack of references from South Asia, or there's something else, or do we need some more research? What's your idea on this? Thank you.
Kashif, if I recall correct, there are 3 regions where with high confidence the migration has been identified as a phenomena happening on ground, and South Asia is one among them, along with Africa and Latin America. And I quoted, and in fact, it also says that by 2050, 31 to 143 million people will be displaced, and that also includes South Asia as one among them. So displacement has been identified as a phenomena in South Asia, and that is linked directly with the climate change vulnerability, which is being forecasted for future.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. I will, if you have time, I will come back to you for some other questions from the audience. I just quickly go with Dr. Imran, who is director at WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature. He's a governance specialist. He has interest in environment, climate, governance, human dimensions of water, environmental impact assessment, environmental risk assessments, conflict resolutions, environment, health and safety. So, Dr. Saab, I just have a very specific question with you that you have read the AR6. If not, then because of this seminar, as Aisha mentioned, that you may go through this report. So I just have a question about that. regarding the sustainable development issues on sectoral impact, just like water, the cross-border water issues and environment, like fog in the summers and other issues, and climate resilient development for South Asia. And just if you can highlight that the issues of traditionally the terms used by the report presenting the severity of evidence through confidence levels. So do you think the confidence level of different sectoral impacts of climate change has increased or decreased? What's your idea on this? Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Kashif. Thank you, SDPI. It's always a pleasure to be back. A very important topic indeed. And as Dr. Abid Suleri mentioned, there's the third part of the report will be launched this afternoon. So look forward to seeing how that comes together with the research vis-a-vis the physical science of climate change, the impacts, adaptation, and now the mitigation aspect that will be coming up. So let's start with this notion of confidence and what that really means. अगर मैं उसको उर्दू में बात करूं तो कॉन्फिडेंस से आप जब बात कर रहे होते हैं तो कॉन्फिडेंस क्या है? आप कहते हैं किसी चीज के वसूख से, क्या कि मैं किसी वसूख से बात कर सकता हूं, कितने एतमाद से किसी चीज के बारे में बात कर सकता हूं. That's what confidence is. It alludes to our level of certainty vis-a-vis the data and science that's available to us when it comes to talking about climate science, climate change, and then related aspects vis-a-vis impacts, adaptation, etc. So if you go back and we start to look at the confidence levels and the initial assessment reports starting in the 90s, I'm not really sure how high they were. But what we know now is that the increasingly the low confidence vis-a-vis the statements in such reports has turned into high confidence. So if you look at the AR5 report from 2013 and you compare it with the physical science in AR6, the low confidence statements fell from about 20% to 6% of the total number of confidence statements. Right, and while the proportion of statements expressing high confidence rose from 36 to 56, so that goes to show that our understanding of the impacts of climate change is getting better. Having said that, there are areas where our confidence isn't that high, and that particularly alludes to certain geographic areas where we don't have enough data coming out of, and perhaps that might also stay that way. But given what we know about how things change over a period of time, I think we'll have an increasing confidence around such statements as we move forward. As far as the physical science is concerned, yes. So we know that now. We know that the term that's being used now is unequivocal. That's the kind of human influence that we are having on climate change. So the certainty level is extremely high. That yes, climate change is happening. It's happening due to anthropogenic reasons. When it comes to whether or not glaciers will be melting at the same rate as in Karakoram versus the Himalayas. Now, here the confidence levels can be a bit different, and that has to do with the amount of data we have available, the level of research we've conducted, and that sort of thing. We're talking about South Asia now. So South Asia is to me a microcosm of our world, right? We've got 2 billion people who cover a landscape and terrain that mimics the world, from up in the Himalayas and the Karakoram, down through the deserts, through the rivers, right up to the ocean. There we've got island states here. We've got mountain states such as Nepal, and so this is something that really reflects what's happening around the world. So it can be, what happens here could be used as an example around the world to make progress vis-a-vis climate change and its redressal. We've talked a lot about how it's impacting us. So this has also been a very educational session for me in terms of learning about how climate change is impacting food security, how we're thinking about it, how we need to think about water, and that sort of a thing. One thing that I'd like to take up as part of the discussion now is to link climate change with the general environmental governance in South Asia, right? So environmental issues have long been a major concern vis-a-vis sustainable development in this part of the world. However, I think that we've put them on the back shelf over the past 10 or 15 years as climate change has come to the fore. And rightly so, climate change needs to be highlighted. But we need not forget the environmental impacts. And I'll tell you why. So in environmental impacts, what do I mean by that? Poor waste management, air pollution, industrial waste, hazardous waste, all of these are important environmental issues that need to be addressed, not only because they're having an effect on the most vulnerable right now, but also because they will exacerbate the impacts of climate change. So the most recent assessment report talks about a 10 to 15% decrease in the monsoons, primarily due to air pollution, due to particulate matter. And where does that come from? Obviously from coal power plants. It comes from vehicular emissions. It comes from open burning of waste, right? And so on one hand, we're worried about water stress, and we're talking about water scarcity. And monsoons have been a key avenue in terms of ensuring our water security, but because of the way we address our governance problems, or we do not, that's going to affect the amount of water that's available to us. So we'll have more extreme weather events. So there'll be more rain in a certain amount of time. But what we're seeing is that the moderate rain events, that they have gone down. And one of the reasons that the researchers are highlighting is due to air pollution. And that's a cross-cutting theme between India and Pakistan through the Indo-Gangetic line. We need to talk about that. Another environmental issue that we haven't been able to address, and it's low-hanging fruit, it's waste management, proper municipal waste management. And if you're not able to handle waste in Pakistani cities, we burn it, so which causes localized air pollution, and then it also leads to greenhouse gas emissions. And if waste is dumped in landfills, and we don't have that many landfills, so it's just dumped openly, it leads to methane emissions. So in the last Conference of Parties, the methane pact was also signed, and Pakistan is a signatory to that. But it's yet to be seen how we'll move forward vis-a-vis that. Urbanization, again, that's an environmental problem. When you're not developing or constructing buildings as per the terrain, the natural environment, keeping in mind the human dimensions, you're going to have a disarray in terms of how cities are growing. And that's going to have an effect vis-a-vis, as already been discussed, heat waves and urban flooding. So we're seeing more and more flash flooding in Pakistan. We've seen it over the past five or 6 years, and that's primarily because of the way we're developing. Moving forward, a couple of areas where I think Pakistan, India, and even other countries can have a discussion on climate change is how we're being impacted by dengue, for example. The dengue mosquito that's quite tropical is now regularly found in Lahore and Islamabad, even in Delhi and moving upwards towards Nepal. The other aspect is locusts. So we've got locust attacks. Locusts coming through the Middle East, coming into Pakistan, and then moving into India. So the political boundaries are there, but climate change and environmental issues do not recognize political boundaries, and hence we need to do the same and come together in terms of addressing some of the challenges. Finally, let me I just want to highlight this. We've been talking about climate change a lot, but we haven't been talking about climate justice. And it seems that, I want to highlight this. What we're doing right now and what we're seeing is the impact of development as it happened in the global West. As it happened in the US, Europe, Russia, Australia. It's happening now to a certain extent in China and India as well, but that's where the greenhouse gas emissions really started. And so we've got a carbon budget, and it's a very minute carbon budget that we are eating up. And we're pretty soon we'll cross 1.5, and I fear that we'll cross 2.2 degrees centigrade as well. And the real culprits, the global West isn't talking about taking care of this and moving towards renewables right now. They're still building coal power plants. They're still relying on fossil fuels, and that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy because when countries like Pakistan, who contribute very little to the greenhouse gas emissions, when we try to develop, suddenly we are put on the spot and said, look, you need to play your part. But are the real culprits playing their part? And that's an issue of climate justice. But I'll end here by highlighting a recent research paper from the journal Nature, which stated that the G20 countries spent approximately $14 billion on the economic stimulus in the COVID and post-COVID period, but only 6% of that was allocated to areas that would cut emissions. So this goes to show that the countries most responsible for the impacts of climate change are definitely not doing enough. And we need to use such forums to call them out, and call them out often, because unless and until we do so, at the end of the day, we'll be left holding the baggage, as it were. So I'll stop here and look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you, Dr. Imran. Very important issue you have highlighted about the political economy of using the fossil fuel for energy, for electricity productions in the West, and also the concerns in the South Asia. So I have some questions, but I will come later with you. Now I'll move to Dr. Hina. Dr. Hina is a research fellow taking a lead in Energy and China Studies Center at SDPI. She has a PhD in ecology from University of Chinese Academy of Sciences, Beijing, and her master is in environment engineering and sciences for Beijing Institute of Technology. Her areas of expertise include natural resource management, ecosystem services, assessments and evaluations, energy, climate change, water resource management, and governance. So with the private partnership, Green China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and Belt and Road Initiatives and Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the areas she's working on. So my question with Hina is that what does IPCC say about the energy transition being critical to tackle energy and climate crisis, particularly related to the climate risks and the adaptation or loss and damages, and what steps should be taken for South Asian countries? Over to you, Dr. Hina.
Thank you so much, Kashif Saab. And firstly, I would like to apologize for my voice and probably some of the words that you may not be able to hear very clearly due to the allergy that I have. But Thank you so much for placing me rightly after the esteemed panelists who have already spoken and laid the foundation and set the tone, be it be the science that has already shown us and made us quite clear that even if we are looking at the optimistic scenario, we are still not, we are far beyond meeting the 1.5 degrees of global warming. And that is going to have, and of course, already having substantial and drastic impacts, damages, irreversible losses that we are seeing in the form of floods, in the form of heat waves, cyclones all over the globe. And as the other speakers have already highlighted, the issues of water, the issues of food security, and many others, I would just like to focus really particularly on the aspect of the energy transition that is critical to meeting the climate change commitments that we are having. In the IPCC report, I could find some of the really global level figures which clearly spells out that how the climate change will be impacting the global power generation over the next decades. And the report has clearly highlighted that with respect to the reductions in the water availability, let's say there will be reductions in the usable capacity of hydropower generation from 61% to 74%. That is, and also 81 to 86% of the thermoelectric power plants between 2040 and 2069. So this is just one of the figure that I could build upon that how these impacts are interrelated with each other, causing a damage from one aspect to another and towards meeting one sustainable development goal to another, and how they are so critical in meeting the needs and the demands and the actions that we take to fight climate change impacts. Another important figure that I could pick out in terms of the loss of cooling water is because the power technologies for the electricity production or the energy production, including the carbon capture and the storage technologies that are very much in fashion, would require as much as 6 times the current cooling water demand. And as the report says that it is already reduced by 7%. And as we could envisage, a 1 degree increase in the heat, the electricity yield will be around, decreased to around 0.1 to 0.7%. So all of these numbers are really reflecting where we are heading towards. We are not just seeing the impacts on the water, but we are having an increasingly an alarming impact on the future of the energy sources that we will be relying on and our next generation will be dependent upon. So this is exactly what brings me to when we are talking about we have to go for a climate resilient development, there's a clearly highlight in the report that how we have to have a clear infrastructure, resilient infrastructure, reliable power systems, and efficient water usage as the best adaptations to a warming climate with a very high confidence. Diversifying generation with a greater decentralization and demand-side power management would increase the system versatility, especially in the rural parts, especially in the South Asian countries where we see the major proportion of the rural areas being deprived of the major access to the energy. Then the climate responsive energy markets, the updated design standards or energy assets according to the current and the projected climate change, along with the smart grid technologies, robust transmission and grid systems with the improved capacity to respond to these supply deficits have a high feasibility in the medium to long term. So where we are looking into these some of these adaptation strategies highlighted by this report, there is a strong interlinkage of the global economy as well across the sectors that is would result in the disruption cost. Let's say some of the numbers that I could get from the global level in China, 33.9% of the population are vulnerable to electricity supply distortion due to climate change impacts. While in the US, in that part of the world, it's projected to have to cost around 50 billion US dollars by the year 2050. So these are all some of the real facts. I could not get the numbers for South Asia, but South Asia, when it comes to the region that we are residing in, I think it creates a much more bigger picture where we are the most vulnerable region in the world and having less financial and fiscal space to actually mitigate and to adapt to these. And some of the, one of the very interesting fact that this reports have highlighted is the maladaptation that these countries have started following in terms of adapting to the climate change impacts. Let's suppose an example of coming from the carbon offsetting techniques like carbon intensive businesses can balance their pollution with the carbon credits or offsetting measures. So as per the report, these it really warns us that as the global temperature rises, these carbon offsetting methods will become highly ineffective. Businesses seeking to kind of insulate themselves from the climate risks can unknowingly increase their exposure to it via maladaptation. For example, I'm giving some examples from the research. As Dr. Fahad has already elaborated, that this report is actually a comprehensive literature review of a lot of the high-level, high impact factor papers. So some of these numbers are actually extracted from those papers who have built upon this report. So one of the paper has exactly highlighted that, let's suppose, including fire suppression in naturally fire-adapted ecosystems or building hard defenses against flooding, where natural defenses could absorb more extreme events. Also, Ms. Aisha has rightly highlighted the urgency of how we can have capable weather forecasting stations to alarm, to have early warning systems, and to enable these to tackle the impacts that will be causing to us, to the people, to the businesses, to the investors, and in the context of course, my talk in the terms of energy projects and energy perspective. While I look into the South Asia perspective, and we have already talked about lots of investments in the fossil fuels, where the primary energy is based on the fossil fuels. The greenhouses generated from this is around 63% of the regional emissions. And so what we are seeing is that the South Asia, where the energy need, where the is becoming more crucial with the rising population and the urbanization, we are looking into a lot more increase in the associated health risks caused by the emissions that will be resulted later on. And what remains to be very critical in this, how we can accelerate the low carbon energy transition, which is very critical to limiting this. I will just like to kind of give reference to a recent report just published 2 days ago, and it was launched at a Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue on 1st of April, which says that and clearly demonstrates that high fossil fuel prices have resulted in energy poverty and loss of industrial competitiveness. Why I have coupled it with the IPCC report, because it clearly outlines that how 80% of the global population living in the countries are net importers of the fossil fuels, while we already know that the renewables are in the lower cost, offering a far more competitive way out of this dependency on the fossil fuels that can allow us and the countries in South Asia to decouple economies from the cost of fossil fuels while driving economic growth and new jobs. And as Sanjay has already mentioned upon the perspective from the just transition, we have these numbers in terms of investing in transition would require almost would bring along concrete socioeconomic welfare benefits if we are moving away from fossil fuel investment to renewables, creating around 85 million jobs worldwide, and the other transition-related technologies between today and 2030. And these job gains would largely surpass the losses of 12 million jobs in the fossil fuel industries. So these are some of the numbers as well that we are foreseeing. And of course, in the South Asian context, it remains a bigger question how to ensure that this transition happens in a just and in a more effective way. So what could be the way forward? What could be the strategies that we could really focus our efforts on? Core energy transition, I think, remains to be a focus where it could build upon the renewable alternate to fossil fuels, that is supporting the expansion of renewable energy technologies such as solar, onshore wind, hydro, and deployment of the new technologies such as offshore wind, battery storage systems, upgradation of networks, and making the systems more resilient. Countries, we have heard about the regional cooperation. So regional energy cooperation is also a very critical component that needs to be strengthened by developing the vibrant regional energy market, supporting the development of green corridors to make energy more accessible to all. And this actually links to the current work that we are beginning to start in terms of how we can make a green corridor along with the China-Pakistan economic corridor under the broader vision of green BRI. Secondly, in the South Asian countries, we must prioritize the decarbonization efforts of the industries and industrial processes, such as the use of fossil fuels in steel and cement and the other industries, you name it. How we can actually ensure the efficient use of energy and raw materials while reducing reliance on the fossil fuel-based fuel. Likewise, in the transport sector, the countries can scale up the electric mobility and also explore other alternative fuels like green hydrogen. Lastly, but not the least, the private sector investment, the corporate, the businesses are having their strong commitments and pledges towards supporting this energy transition. How to enable it with a more conducive, with a more enabling policy environment, with measures, with right strategies, with market reforms, and also from the investors' point of view, how to enable this transition remains a significant point to look at to accelerate this transition. And of course, we are hearing about retirement of the coal-fired power plants. We are looking into, we are hearing about the moratoriums on the coal-based power generations, but how to practically implement it in the context of the political economy of the countries we are living in. I think that also remains one of the biggest challenges that we are facing. So looking ahead, I think South Asia has a large potential to boost zero carbon power generation because we have huge resources in terms of solar, in terms of other renewable energy technologies, abundant capacities in terms of the resources, the natural resources available, and also serving as an emerging power market, and governments being committing to take some decisive actions along with some public-private partnerships. I think we could clearly increase or high-level seek this high-level support to deliver the climate results that we are seeking, and it could be through lowering the energy, and it could resultantly not only bring in the climate change impacts, but also the economic side of the story, where we are looking into the lower energy prices for the households. We are looking into the promoting the indigenous and the local manufacturing industry, including the job growth, and significantly contributing to the climate change mitigation. So these are some of the hardcore figures that I wanted to build the case upon, and I think makes it really vital that how energy transition is a really core element of this climate change report, and how we could foresee it happening in the context of South Asia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Hina. Very elaborative or very interesting discussion on energy and climate change, energy transition. So I just have a quick round of questions if the audience want to ask, or because I have also some last questions for most of the speakers. So any questions from the audience? So please ask.
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much for this session, and it's really innovative and informative for me as an environmentalist. I'm a student of environment. Just need to know, ma'am, can you please tell me, do you have any kind of framework for our country for climate change adaptation model, for smart city buildings, for energy conservation, something like this? Do we have something like this, or are we following the rest of the world?
Yes, so I think I will particularly begin with the question. So for the housing sector, we do have those standards of energy conservation and the labels elaborated in the policy and the strategy being made by the National Energy Conservation and Authority, NECA, under the Ministry of Energy. So that clearly outlines that what needs to be done in the housing sector. But of course, that policy is still in the consultation process, and there are gaps to be filled. And of course, the implementation of the policy still remains a challenge in the country like Pakistan. How we could ensure that, of course, this low carbon development or low carbon housing is seen in the so Pakistan Engineering Council had already developed some of these standards for like building codes and some efficiency standards for these housing and construction. But to be very honest, on the real implementation side, what we are seeing in these the boom of this construction happening all around us, of course, to meet the needs of the rising population and the growth that we are seeing, it remains at a very low priority. And so as being an environmentalist, we know that with every development project, there has to be environmental impact assessments and strategic environmental impacts assessment, but the level it's being done, it's really compromised. The compliance is not there, the reporting, the transparency, the data. So all these challenges are so interrelated that I think needs to be looked at. Yeah.
Well, you take one and then.
This is Hansa from SDPI. I have a question to Dr. Abid, Hussain, and Mr. Sanjay. Sir, we all know that climate-induced migrations are making left behind female members vulnerable. But I'm keen to know that what are the way forwards to protect and to empower these women, particularly in terms of decision making and sustainable livelihood.
Dr. Abid, can you respond? And then Sanjay.
Sorry, I could not get the first part of the question. Could you please repeat the first part of question?
Yes, sir. My question is that, as we know, research says that climate-induced migrations are making left behind female members vulnerable. But what are the way forwards to protect these vulnerable women in terms of their decision-making and sustainable livelihood?
Particularly in a sense of mountainous areas, that how the vulnerable women their risk can be mitigated. So what are the strategies for the women to, in terms of climate change, resilience and adaptations? So that's, I think that grabs the question. Doctor, are you with us? No.
Okay. Then again, Sanjay, We want to. I also have a. Are you back?
Hello.
So, do you can get the question from Hansa, or are you still not? Actually, she was asking about the vulnerabilities of spontaneous movement, their strategies or adaptations, if there is any suggestions, so the policy making efforts that need to be taken care for these movements. So that's the crux of that question.
So yeah, Dr. Saab, you got the question or not? Dr. Saab, your mic is mute, so we are not able to hear you.
Hello.
Ji, आवाज आ रही है? Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, still I could not hear the question properly because of unstable internet on my side. Now I have connected to hotspot on my mobile. So she's asking about the women-centric policies, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So actually recently we have been doing a review of policies of all South Asian countries. So out of this review, we have found, yes, now policies are giving due attention to women-centric issues, gender and GSE issues, particularly one example from Pakistan's climate change policy. So women-centric issues are very well addressed in this policy document, but still the socially vulnerable groups are not coming out very strongly. Not only women, children, elderly, differently able people, and marginalized groups, particularly in desert area and mountains, are also part of that social inclusion framework, overall framework. Yes, on women now focus is being made. In India, state policies are paying attention to women-centric solutions or interventions. In Nepal, particularly in Bangladesh, there are few countries, for example, Sri Lanka and Maldives, we could not find women-centric instruments or policy strategies, but almost other countries are paying attention to reduce the gender vulnerabilities or inequalities women are facing in overall, achieving overall adaptation or resilience in the development discourse. So progress is being made. Yeah, over.
I have another question from you, and then I move to Sanjay for that he can answer the question, Hansa's question. But so you have mentioned about the new aspects of food security that is taken care in the report. So based on that, what type of you think that new research in food security and nutrition can emerge, and it is very useful for the South Asia. So, Dr. Sen?
Yeah. In the IPCC assessment report, this working group 2 report, so main focus still remains on 4 dimensions of food security: availability, stability, utilization, and accessibility. So more recent development has been made. Now food security multi-dimensional framework has 6 dimensions. Now we have 2 new dimensions: sustainability and agency. Agency covers gender issues, social inequalities, income inequalities. All type of inequalities are under agency. So now it means gender is getting recognized and being acknowledged in this multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary framework of food security. And sustainability, the difference between stability and sustainability is stability is more a short-term disturbances in food systems, and sustainability is more a long-term disturbances. Climate change may also induce short-term disturbances and long-term disturbances as well, but biodiversity can lead to long-term disturbances in food systems. So if I put the findings of recent assessment into these 6 dimensions of food security, so it means it clearly shows that climate change is inducing both short-term and long-term disturbances, impacting both stability and sustainability of food system. If these 2 dimensions are disturbed, these are cross-cutting. These dimensions disturb all 4 dimensions. If post-UN Food System Summit narrative if I put here, so more focusing on nature-based solutions, conservation, and environment. It means if we take the food systems approach also, climate change is cross-cutting. Still, these 4 dimensions are underlying in the food systems approach as well. Food systems contribute to 6 dimensions, and 6 dimensions feed into the ultimate food security outcomes. So overall, if I see developments are made in terms of methodology also, it's good that in this assessment, dimensions are taking due attention in scientific literature and coming out very strongly. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Now I move to Sanjay. A quick question that can South Asia has an agenda on climate change? So do you think that with this new report there is some shift, or that it is called comprehensive, or you are planning to broaden it, or what you what do you say about that? Your strategies about CANSA, how we can expand, or how we can be more integrative in terms of sectoral aspect and also at the regional level. Thank you.
Kashif, question badal dete ho yaar. Okay. Well, before that, I'll answer on the displacement question. I heard it. I think the role or what needs to be done when women are impacted and they're also part of the vulnerable, stakeholders and forced to migrate. So I think one, certainly we need a localized adaptation plan. As local it is, as women-centric it would be. So that's important. National action. I mean, we did some research and we looked at some of the even subnational level plans we reviewed. We just did one thing on the digital document. We just looked for woman word and we couldn't find woman word also. So even they have not been identified as those around whom the adaptation strategies need to be evolved. So that certainly was missing. So we need to do that. Second, increased role of women in decision making and governance, important. So please, you all take a lead, be part of the decision making process. So that's important. Prioritize 3 sectors which are directly linked with women and children: wash, nutrition, and education. Directly linked. That needs to be done. I mean, for migrants, for example, when we speak about what needs to be done, we normally say, okay, wherever the migrants will go, basically male population, mostly in South Asia, what kind of security they should get, what kind of should they have a place to stay at night, should they have minimum wages guarantee scheme. We don't look at the women who are left behind at the destination, how their food security needs to be met, how they need to have a secure environment around it. So that's one example. Also, if women migrate, the wages differ for male and female based on the labor they put, which actually puts women behind in terms of coping. And then, of course, and that is why I think what is more important is that we design strategies with women at core. Now, in terms of new IPCC reports that has been released in the CANSA program, Kashif, certainly we need to increase the scope of the program, looked at loss and damage. Not only, as of now, we're looking at migration, but loss and damage, especially in terms of non-economic losses, slow onset impact. That's not being worked on. So that work need to be be scaled up. Our members are our strength, and we need to work with members on that. Another important aspect which is coming again and again, and we have been talking about it, is energy transition. So we have already started calling for a fossil fuel treaty so that coal or oil are phased out. Countries signed to international treaty that complements UNFCCC process. Also, we are practicing some of the energy transition project on ground where coal mines are being closed, on how energy transition should happen. And our expectation is that once we have an architecture of energy transition ready, then it will give a lot more confidence to the energy planners also on that energy transition is possible, and we can certainly go for it. And it will also help us to achieve our development agenda. As of now, energy transition or shifting from fossil fuel to renewable is seen as if countries need to stall their development, which is not the case. So we need to prove that also. That's the second part. We're also looking at urban areas now, the vulnerability in urban areas. I think we need to have similar program in Pakistan also, like we have already one in India. But let's talk about it in Nepal, in Bangladesh also, where urban in cities, there are two roles, objectives need to achieve. One, those who are migrating, they should have resilience, higher resilience, and those who are staying here, rich population, they should shift for energy transition. They should go for a low carbon, lifestyle. So that's the third aspect of it. And equity and climate justice need to run across, and that is why we are prioritizing those who are vulnerable.
So there is one quick question from our audience. So from Khalid, Imran, Khalid, and Sanjay. So
can I ask you, Dr. Sanjay, about the localization? You talked about localization, and I think it's the most important thing. Modern problem needs modern solutions. But can we talk about the indigenous knowledge we have, that the things which our forefathers are doing to adapt themselves to the changes? Can we use them in the modern solutions with the AI specifically?
Absolutely, and I think this is mentioned in IPCC Working Group 2 already, and I'm expecting that this is going to be the case in Working Group 3 report, which is being released tonight. So yes, traditional knowledge will have an important role to play, and traditional knowledge complemented with AI would certainly make it scalable, and will also see, we do not accept traditional knowledge many times because we don't understand the science behind it. But as and when we start deciphering the science behind the traditional knowledge, and we link it with the modern science, more and more people will be willing to adopt it. So that has a very high scope of finding solutions.
Yeah, good to know. And my second question is for Dr. Imran. Khalid. Sir, you talked about the linkage between the institutions. Can we improve the quality of environment through that? Specifically, I'm talking about environmental justice, because poverty is directly linked to environmental injustice. That some countries, as you told, pollute, and some countries are blamed for their small contributions to that. Can we rearrange something for that? Like if we move to environmental health, that dengue and lotus, these are the two attacks we have on the food security and on our local health. Can we make sure that we obey the law of nature against the law of men that we constructed? Thank you.
Yeah. So the law of nature is such that it doesn't recognize the law of man, and rightly so. So it's us who are going to have to alter our way of doing things. And so locusts, I'll give you the example of locusts, and I'll give you the example of traditional knowledge that Sanjay was just addressing. So if you start to do some research and go to Google Scholar and look up the history of locust attacks in South Asia, you'll go back to as far back as, and that's when we still had research, and perhaps this has been happening much before that, to the 1880s and 1890s, and definitely in the early 20th century. That's when you had these departments, and then there was a center that was addressing this. It was based in Karachi. It was based in Karachi because Karachi at that time was sort of a hub right in between the track that the locusts took, right through Sindh, and then it went into Gujarat and so on and so far into India. So a center there would basically provide surveillance for what was happening. Now, after independence and after India and Pakistan came into being as they are today, that coordination stopped happening. The natural processes, the locusts are still coming, and then due to the effects of climate change, perhaps their effect is exacerbating. But we have not really opted for mechanisms whereby we can coordinate. We've been talking about water. So yes, in water, we came up with the Indus Waters Treaty, and at that particular time, it was quite a good thing to do, and it's been cited as an example across the world. But the Indus Waters Treaty did not account for environmental flows. It did not account for climate change. So the three rivers that went India's way, the three eastern rivers, there is no water flowing in them unless there's a flood. And that has an impact on the ecology, that has an impact on livelihoods. And so all of those things need to be accounted for now, and that can only be done after discussions. So just talking about it and saying, look, yeah, we need to bring in institutions and do this or do that won't work. It needs to be there needs to be a concerted effort whereby you are constantly talking to each other and interacting with each other to resolve some of these issues. The two issues that we just talked about are only two of the dozens of issues that impact countries across South Asia.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. We just have 3 minutes, so I just quickly go toward Fahad and Hina for their last questions and then their answers. So to Fahad is that what research agenda you think that at regional scale we can propose so we can work together for the climate science, for the adaptation science, and then for the mitigation side. And same question is with Dr. Hina.
Thank you once again, Kashif, for the question. So, yeah, I would say that in the end, you have hit the nail on the head. That it's very important that I think it was Aisha who talked about the need for collaborative research at the regional scale. And I couldn't agree more with her. I mean, it's like, and also for the institutions like civil society organization, NGOs, like we know that like we have CAN in India and based in India, ICIMOD in Nepal, Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Pakistan, the top think tank civil society organization. So we must realize that since we are a policy institute, it is very important to also recognize that the research we conduct, that research should go into the peer-reviewed literature. Somehow I have a feeling that we here at SDPI we failed to develop that culture of publishing the paper in peer-reviewed journal, because once you publish it, it will go into the literature base where the IPCC author would have that luxury to look at that particular paper. The reports, the graded literature, that is no more considered, and probably this might be one of the reason. I think Dr. Abid was also mentioning, or it was Sanjay, I guess, that there's more information is reflected in the report from India. Perhaps that could be one of the reasons that we are not having a culture of publishing, because there's a lot of good research which is reflected in the gray literature, but there's just one small step forward to publish it done into peer-reviewed literature. So I think that should be done in terms of the regional cooperation. Of course, that is absolutely necessary to share the knowledge, to share the experiences. Just there was a question about indigenous knowledge, and I mean we share the same kind of the culture and the climate is the same, the habits are the same. Perhaps this exchange of knowledge can into the policy making, that would be super helpful. And of course, India, I would say that India is a country which in South Asia is a big brother, and or perhaps a very big brother. So it should take a lead to take other countries on board to go along with it. And I must just sorry for the long intervention, but I must appreciate the way India is negotiating during the IPCC reports, plenaries, and UNFCCC. So it'll really be good, Sanjay. You have something in your hand to make this change, and let's do it together. I mean, I see that all the countries in the regions, the policymakers, they have apprehensions, but we must recognize that this climate change is an existential threat. Just imagine the plight of a person who is a farmer in the village, and he has lost his livelihood, lost his annual earning. That this should be beyond the the politics we are talking about. We have an example of European Union. They were fighting 70 years ago, like the Second World War, and now they are like their borders are open for trade. So I mean, this falls on our shoulder to give something to our next generation, to make a change, to convince people for the regional cooperation. I'm very sorry, Kashif, for the long intervention.
Thank you so much. I think I'll just take 2 minutes to build upon what Dr. Fahad has already mentioned. So behavioral change and climate science and climate action is also really important. While we are talking about the, making a change, use of making the more policies more women-centric, gender-focused, have an integrated approach to tackle many issues altogether. I think we need to be looking to how we can do that. So there needs to, bring in a lot of effort in how we can actually impose upon the behavioral change that is required to make this move and this acceleration forward. In the context of South Asia, where the economic challenges are farther more than what we are talking today, and climate change is no doubt is an economic case now, of how to put it in a more decisive way that the policymakers, the decision makers in the negotiations can take it as an economic case and link it to how it's going to impact some of these sectors, have their all their efforts, all their actions, strategies, policies, measures taken in terms of mitigation and adaptation to the impacts that we are facing. I think that is the need of today. I'm not sure if it was there in this IPCC report, but I really hope that this, the synthesis report that is releasing today should be appreciating this as well. In the IPCC, we also talk about the nature-based solutions and where the indigenous knowledge, the question that you put forward, I think it's one of the key elements that plays a huge role in that. So along with that, I think there's so much that we can talk about today, but I think in the interest of time, I would just like to thank you to Kashif for organizing this really informative panel discussion today, along with very eminent speakers who have vast knowledge, lots of knowledge sharing that we envisage, and I think lots to take forward for the climate action that we are taking together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hina and Fahad. Actually, I think it's a good discussion, and it's बड़ा मुश्किल हो रहा है इसको खत्म करने में, लेकिन anyway, it's 5 minutes over. So I will thank you, Sanjay and Dr. Hussain from India and Nepal, and Dr. Imran from WWF Pakistan, Fahad, Climate Analytics, and also Dr. Hina and Dr. Aisha for wonderful discussion on this report. Hopefully, as this report, third report is going to launch today or maybe tomorrow. So we will also schedule another such seminar, and then we will discuss these things, and we continue to discuss these regional and global reports and the outcomes together, so that we can act together, we can integrate our research and policies and our efforts. So thank you very much, all the speakers and our audience. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.